Hello and welcome. In this video we look at the absolute value and mainly equations. So what is the absolute value of a number? We take an example. The absolute value of 2 is exactly the distance of 2 from 0. So on the number line we have 2, this is the position of 2, and we have 0, the origin. The distance between them is 2. And that's exactly the absolute value of 2. Okay, we have a notation for the absolute value. This absolute value of this distance is written on this form. Okay, so we write the absolute value of 2 equals 2. Now what is the absolute value of negative 2? Here is negative 2. How far is it from 0? So we have 2 units. So in this case, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. And we write the absolute value of negative 2 using the notation equals 2. Remember, it's a distance, so it's always positive. So absolute value of negative 2 equals 2. Now, what is the absolute value of 4? This is the distance of 4 from 0. So it's 4. And if we want to find the absolute value of negative 4, we look at the distance of negative 4 from 0. So the absolute value of both of them is 4. Right. As you can see, these two absolute values are equal because both of them are 4. So we can write the absolute value of 4 equals absolute value of negative 4. And in general, the absolute value of two opposite numbers are equal. For example, if you are asked to solve absolute value of x equals 4, so what is the value of x? Definitely they are 4 and negative 4. Okay, so what are the solution of the equation absolute value of a equals 7? So we look for the point that is 7 away from 0. Is the point on the right, 7 units away, and on the left as well. Negative 7 is 7 units away from 0. And that's why this equation has two solutions, 7 and negative 7. So we write absolute value of a equals 7. Solutions are a equals 7 or a equals negative 7. Now let's have more examples on solving equations with absolute value. Here's the first example. X minus 1 should be 7 or negative 7. Okay, so we just add 1 to each side to get the value of x. Okay, so we get 8 or negative 6. Another example, a plus 3 should be 11 or negative 11. Now subtract 3 from each side to get your solution. Okay, here's another example. So 2a plus 3 must be 11 or negative 11 because it's the expression inside the absolute value. Now subtract 3 from each side and then divide by 2 each side to get your solutions. Make sure you should be able to solve multi-step equations, linear equations. I have some videos on this type of equations. Okay, so we divide by 2 and we get equal 4 or equal negative 7. These are my two solutions. Another example. So we should take what's inside the absolute value, 3a minus 2 equals 8 or negative 8. And then we solve the linear equations. Add 2 to each side and then divide by 3 each side. You get 10 over 3 for the first equation. And you get negative 2 for the second equation. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. Okay, this is not the equation. In this case, we have to isolate the absolute value on one side and the number on the other side. So we have to add 11 to each side. Okay, and then we carry on. We just put equal 11 or equal negative 11 and we subtract 3 from each side to get the two solutions, 8 or negative 14. This is not example. Isolate the absolute value on one side, so we have to add 11 to each side. Okay, and then simplify to get the absolute value on one side equals 13. Now use the definition equals 13 or negative 13 and subtract 3 from each side to get your solutions. Let's have one more example. In this case, we have multiplied 2. So we start by adding 11 to each side. Okay. And then we divide by 2. We always isolate the absolute value. We should have the absolute value on one side, okay, and the numbers on the other side. Divide by 2 to get your absolute value equals 7, and then just use the definition equals 7 or negative 7, subtract 3 from each side, and you get your two solutions, 4 or negative 10. Here's another example. Add 11 to each side, and then divide by 2 each side to isolate the absolute value. Always make sure your target is to put the absolute value on one side. Divide by 2 to get absolute value equals 7, and then what's inside the absolute value is 7 or negative 7. Subtract 3 from each side to get negative 8, and then take the opposite to get negative 4 or 10. Let's have another example. Here we subtract 11 from each side to get 2 absolute value of 3 minus 8 equals negative 8. Divide by 2 to isolate the absolute value. If you have any coefficient, you divide by it. Okay, and then you get absolute value equals negative 4. In this case, it's impossible. The absolute value is a distance. It cannot be negative. Absolute value of x cannot be equal to negative 4, for example. This is impossible. So the absolute value is a positive value. Okay. Now here's another example. Subtract 11 from each side and simplify, then divide by negative 4 each side to get absolute value equals 4. Here we carry on. Equals 4 or negative 4. Now subtract 1 from each side to get negative 3x equals 3 or negative 3x equals negative 5 by subtracting 1. Now divide by negative 3 to get your two solutions, negative 1 or negative 5 over negative 3. By simplification we get 5 over 3. Negative over negative is positive. Okay, that's it. I hope this is going to help. Thank you for watching and see you soon.